In Lagos, silence is the rent many tenants pay to survive. But Musa Abdullahi believed his clean record and punctual rent would shield him from trouble, until the day the landlord's daughter knocked on his door with a smile sharp enough to cut through the calm. Musa Abdullahi had lived in the cracked two-story building on Olawara Street, Lagos, for nearly 6 years. He was the kind of tenant everyone noticed but never complained about. A tall, wiry man in his late 30s, Musa carried himself with quiet dignity. His face was lean, framed by a thin beard that always seemed freshly trimmed, and his eyes bore that mix of weariness and determination common to men who worked hard but never quite broke even. Every morning before dawn, Musa left the compound in a faded blue shirt and black trousers, heading to his job as a dispatch rider for a logistics company. By nightfall, he returned with the Lagos dust clinging to his clothes, the city's chaos etched into his skin, yet he always greeted neighbors with a tired smile. Unlike some tenants who let the noise of Lagos infect their tempers, Musa was patient. Children ran around his door, women sometimes quarreled by the shared tap, but Musa kept to himself. His small, one-room apartment was modest but orderly. A neatly folded mattress by the wall, a wooden shelf with carefully stacked books and delivery records, and a radio that played Hausa news in the evenings. Most importantly, Musa was punctual with his rent. Everyone in the compound knew it. He paid before the due date, often reminding others when theirs was close. In a city where landlords were quick to seize on excuses, Musa prided himself on keeping his record clean. To the neighbors, he was simply Musa Rider. To himself, he was a man just trying to survive Lagos, one delivery, one rent payment, one quiet day at a time. Alhaji Suleiman was the kind of landlord Lagos produced in plenty. Rich enough to own a house, but too greedy to ever be satisfied. His house on Olawara Street was built like a long barracks, a row of single rooms and self-contained units that shared one common yard. Unlike most landlords who stayed away, Alhaji lived right there in the compound, occupying 2 renovated flats at the far end with his family. To the tenants, he presented himself as a man of respect. On Fridays, he would stroll across the compound in his flowing white kaftan, prayer beads swinging in his hand, greeting tenants with rehearsed warmth. "Ah, my people, how are you managing? Hope no leakage in your roof? If anything, just let me know." The tenants would nod politely, even smile, though everyone knew the moment you brought a real complaint, his face hardened like stone. His wife, Mama Rukaya, was a stout woman who dressed in bright lace wrappers and spoke with the air of someone who believed she was above the tenants. She hardly mixed with anyone, except to scold children who played too close to her veranda or to remind neighbors that her husband was a man of great connections. But it was their daughter, Samira, who carried her father's arrogance like a crown. In her mid-20s, with smooth caramel skin and sharp features, she dressed in fitted jeans and flashy wigs, often returning late at night in tinted cars. Tenants whispered but never confronted her. Everyone knew Samira had her father's ear. She walked through the compound as if the cracked cement floors were laid only for her footsteps. The strange thing was how Alhaji managed to keep a mask of benevolence. During Salah, he distributed small bags of rice to tenants, making speeches about how, "We are one family here." During rent collection, he cracked jokes, laughing loudly, calling people, "my brother," or "my sister." But behind closed doors, his temper was legendary. He was quick to threaten eviction over the smallest delays, and he had a way of twisting rules to his favor. The tenants tolerated him because they had little choice. After all, in Lagos, shelter was survival, and Alhaji knew it. He smiled with his mouth, but his eyes always measured how much he could squeeze from each person. Behind the white kaftan and loud greetings, Alhaji Suleiman's home was far from the picture of respectability he painted. The man was greedy, not only with money but with appetite. Everyone in the compound knew he had a wandering eye. The rumor was that one of the young women renting a single room near the gate was more than just a tenant. At night, his footsteps were sometimes heard crossing the yard when he thought no one was watching. His wife, Mama Rukaya, kept silent, but the bitterness sat heavy on her face. Inside their flat, tension simmered like stew left too long on fire. Alhaji's greed for money meant constant fights with his wife. He hoarded rent money, never spending a kobo on repairs. When the roof leaked, he blamed the wicked rain. When the soakaway overflowed, he insisted the tenants should fix it themselves. Yet every month, he was seen driving new cars, his fingers glittering with fat gold rings. Samira, their daughter, was the jewel Alhaji flaunted proudly in public. But her life was not as glossy as the wigs she wore. For all her fine clothes and English accent, she had a reputation that traveled faster than her heels could carry her. 3 different suitors had come to see her hand in marriage in just 1 year, but each one backed away after Lagos gossip reached them. The whispers of late-night outings, of tinted cars dropping her off when the muezzin's call for dawn prayer was already in the air, were enough to stain any proposal. Mama Ruqayya tried to protect her daughter's image, speaking loudly of her discipline and respect, but her voice was laced with desperation. She knew the compound women talked in hushed tones, shaking their heads as Samira passed by. Even within the family, the cracks were showing. Samira resented her father's control, often clashing with him when he tried to dictate her movements. Al-Haji accused her of disrespect, while she hissed and stormed into her room, slamming the door. The house that looked like authority from the outside was full of secrets and whispers inside. The tenants saw only fragments of this drama, but fragments were enough. They smiled politely when Al-Haji strutted through the yard, yet they knew he was not the man he pretended to be. His home was no sanctuary of peace but a stage where greed, betrayal, and pretense performed daily. By late afternoon, the compound at Olawara Street was alive with its usual rhythm. Children chased each other barefoot across the cracked cement, their laughter mixing with the pounding of pestles as women prepared dinner. Radios blared from open windows, Fuji music from one room, Hausa news from another, and the faint smell of fried plantain drifted across the yard. It was a place of survival, not comfort. Buckets lined up at the shared tap, waiting for water that often trickled too slowly. Clothes hung on sagging lines, some already stiff from the Lagos dust. Tenants moved carefully, their greetings polite, their smiles cautious. Everyone knew it was wiser to keep small in Al-Haji Suleiman's compound. Too many had seen how quickly his charm turned into thunder when displeased. Musa returned from work that day, his helmet dangling from one hand, his shirt still carrying the grime of Lagos traffic. He greeted his neighbors with his usual nod, balancing tiredness with courtesy. A few tenants murmured greetings back, but their eyes flickered nervously toward the landlord's end of the yard. The reason soon became clear. Samira was standing on the veranda, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp like blades waiting for flesh. She wore ripped black jeans and a red blouse that shimmered as she shifted her weight from one hip to another. A folded document was clutched in her hand. The compound seemed to hold its breath when she descended the steps. The children slowed their games, the women paused their cooking. Musa had barely reached his door when her voice cut through the yard. "You, Musa Ryder," she called, her tone dripping with mockery. "Yes, you. Come here. My father says you must vacate this place immediately. This is your notice." A ripple went through the compound, whispers, quick glances, silence. Musa froze, his brows knitting in confusion. He had paid his rent just 3 weeks ago. He still had the receipt tucked neatly in his bag. Samira strutted closer, waving the paper like a weapon. "Do not stand there looking lost. You think you can disrespect my father and remain here? Pack your things. We are not running charity in Lagos." Musa inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He looked around. Neighbors pretended to mind their business, though their ears strained to catch every word. This was how things always played out in Al-Haji's compound. Silence for survival. But Musa was not one to bow his head without a word. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I don't understand, madam. I paid my rent in full. I have the receipt. What is this about?" The yard grew stiller, the air heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew this was not just an argument. It was the beginning of something that would either be silenced quickly or ignite a fire none of them had the courage to keep burning. Samira's lips curled into a sneer. "Receipt?" she scoffed, her voice loud enough to echo against the walls. "Which receipt? Who told you that scrap of paper will save you? My father said you must go, and that is final." Musa straightened his shoulders, the day's fatigue replaced with a quiet fire. He dug into his bag and pulled out a folded slip, worn at the edges but clear in its writing. "Here," he said, holding it up for all to see. "Paid on the 12th of last month. Signed and stamped by your father himself." Gasps rippled through the crowd that had now gathered discreetly. Women leaning on their door frames, men standing just outside their rooms, children crouched low to the ground. They were pretending to be passive, but the drama had swallowed the compound whole. Samira snatched the receipt, glanced at it briefly, then tore it in two with deliberate slowness. The sound of ripping paper cracked through the yard like thunder. "This," she hissed, letting the pieces fall to the ground, "means nothing. Do you think my father cannot decide who stays and who goes? Do you think Lagos law will save you? Even the police bow when my father speaks. Musa's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his voice sharper now. So this is not about rent. It's about power. You think because your father sits here like a king, we are slaves? We are human beings, not goats to be chased in and out of a pen. Her eyes flashed, and her voice rose higher, shriller. Mind yourself, Musa Rider. If you knew the kind of people backing my father, you would not open your mouth. The men who collect housing tax, the ones in the council, they eat from our hands. Do you hear me? Eat. You are nothing but dust under our shoes. A stunned silence fell across the yard. The tenants looked at one another, eyes wide. For years they had suspected Al-Haji's long arm reached further than their compound, but to hear it spat out so openly by his own daughter, it was a confirmation none dared to voice. Musa's chest heaved with indignation. His hand shook as he pointed at the ground where the receipt scraps lay. One day, truth will rise higher than your father's walls. And when it does, no council, no police, no official will cover him. We all know what he does with tenants' money. We all know the truth. The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. But no one moved. The women kept their eyes low, the men shuffled uneasily, the children looked away. In Lagos, survival often demanded silence. Samira smiled slowly, victory curling her lips. Shout as much as you want, Musa. Nobody will stand with you. By tomorrow morning, your things will be on the street. From the far end of the yard, the heavy sound of a door creaked open. Al-Haji Suleiman himself stepped out, his kaftan gleaming white, his face calm but his eyes sharp as razors. The conflict was no longer just between Musa and Samira, the king had entered his court. Al-Haji Suleiman's steps were unhurried, measured, the way a man walked when he knew the ground itself belonged to him. His prayer beads clicked softly in his hand, his smile calm and disarming. Musa, he said warmly, his voice carrying the tone of an elder chastising a child, what is all this noise in my compound? You are a sensible man, I know you. Why are you raising your voice at my daughter? Musa turned to him, struggling to steady his breath. Al-Haji, with respect, I don't understand what's happening. I paid my rent in full. You signed the receipt yourself. Yet your daughter says I must leave. The landlord chuckled lightly, as though Musa had cracked a small joke. He patted the air with his free hand, the way a man calms restless goats. Musa, my rider. Calm down. You know me, have I ever cheated you? My daughter is young, hot-tempered. Maybe she spoke too harshly. Don't take it to heart. A murmur passed through the crowd. Some tenants even dared to exchange glances. This was Al-Haji's familiar mask, the benevolent patriarch. Musa felt a flicker of relief. Perhaps this madness would end here. Al-Haji placed a hand on Musa's shoulder, squeezing it with practiced gentleness. Let me see the receipt, Let us resolve this peacefully like family. Musa bent down to gather the torn pieces from the ground, trying to fit them together in his palm. His voice was steady but hopeful. It was here, Al-Haji. Your signature, your stamp. I keep all my records. You know I've never defaulted. The landlord clicked his tongue and shook his head in mock sympathy. Ayah, what a pity. Torn like this, how can we confirm it now? And you know these days, so many forgeries are moving around Lagos. People are cunning. Even I must be careful. The tenants lowered their eyes again, silence spreading like smoke. Musa's chest tightened as the faint hope drained out. He searched Al-Haji's face and saw nothing but that polished, deceptive smile. But don't worry, Al-Haji continued, his tone soft, almost fatherly. I will help you. Pack your things tomorrow, move out quietly. I will not disgrace you by calling police. I will even give you a little refund, just to show there is no bad blood. Musa's throat felt dry. Refund? For rent I already paid in full? For a room I still have months to use? Al-Haji raised his brows, feigning wounded pride. Musa, must you speak like this? Have I not tried to be fair? Look around. These people here know I am a good landlord. I am only following procedure. If I do not enforce discipline, this whole compound will collapse into lawlessness. Sometimes, for the good of the many, one man must sacrifice. His voice was rich with false wisdom, each word wrapping deceit in the cloak of reason. The tenants, hearing the familiar performance, kept their lips sealed. None would step forward for Musa. By the time the landlord turned back toward his flat, his prayer beads swinging once again, the matter was already settled. Musa stood there in the fading light, clutching the torn scraps of his receipt, the truth heavy in his chest. Al-Haji had smiled like a father, spoken like a friend, but crushed him like dust. And by morning, as promised, Musa's belongings lay scattered on the street, proof that power in Lagos wore the face of kindness while its hands closed tight around her throat. The next morning, Musa left for work determined to fight. He told himself that Al-Haji was only bluffing, that reason would prevail if he showed his proof, if he stood firm. He tucked the scraps of his torn receipt carefully in his bag, determined to find someone, anyone, who would listen. But Lagos was unforgiving. All day, as he wove through traffic delivering parcels, Musa's mind circled back to the compound. By the time he rode home, the clouds had thickened and rain was pouring hard, drumming against the zinc roofs like fists. When he entered the yard, his heart sank. His door was open, the lock broken. His few possessions, mattress, books, radio, cooking pots, were strewn in the mud just outside the compound gate, soaked through and beaten by the rain. Clothes clung heavy to the ground, a photograph of his late parents sagged against the gutter, the ink already running. Musa dropped his helmet, rushing forward in disbelief. Who did this? Who touched my things? His voice cracked with fury and grief. Samira's laughter rang out from the veranda. She leaned casually against the railing, arms folded, watching him with wicked amusement. You didn't believe, did you? I told you, you cannot fight us. Now look. The tenants hovered at their doors, eyes wide but lips sealed. A few shook their heads, sympathy written on their faces, but none dared step forward. They knew what Musa was learning too late. Silence was the rent you paid to survive in Al-Haji's house. Moments later, Al-Haji appeared, calm as ever, prayer beads in hand, his kaftan untouched by the rain. He spread his hands as if he, too, were a victim of fate. Musa, my son, he said, his voice rich with false pity. I tried my best, did I not? But you see, the compound must have peace. Better you go quietly than for me to call the police. Please, accept it as God's will. Everything happens for a reason. Musa fell to his knees in the mud, his palms pressed together in desperate plea. Al-Haji, please, I have nowhere to go. At least let me carry my things inside until I find another place. See, everything is getting ruined in this rain. Please, in God's name. But Al-Haji's face hardened. He turned away, murmuring to the tenants gathered in the shadows. You all see how patient I am. I begged him to move with dignity, but some men do not listen. May God save us from troublemakers. The words settled over the compound like a verdict. Musa's cries mingled with the rain, but no one moved to help. One by one, doors closed. The yard grew quiet again, except for the sound of water slapping against Musa's ruined belongings. Samira smirked once more, then vanished inside. Al-Haji followed, his beads clicking rhythmically in his hand, his white kaftan still shining. And Musa was left kneeling in the storm, surrounded by everything he owned, washed away by rain and power. 2 days later, Musa decided he would not give up. His belongings were still piled outside the compound, damp and smelling of mildew, but he told himself he would fight with whatever little strength he had left. If Al-Haji wanted a battle, then he would take it beyond the compound. He borrowed a clean shirt from a neighbor and went into town, his last savings tucked carefully in his pocket. After a long search, he found a small law office squeezed between a pharmacy and a printing shop. The sign above the door read, Barrister Okoro and Associates. Inside, the office smelled of dust and paper. Behind a desk stacked with files sat a middle-aged man with rimmed glasses, his face tired but professional. Musa poured out his story, every detail, from the rent paid, to the torn receipt, to the humiliation of his things thrown into the rain. The lawyer listened patiently, nodding, occasionally scribbling notes. When Musa finished, Barrister Okoro leaned back in his chair, tapping the desk with his pen. This is a strong case, he said at last. Illegal eviction, clear evidence of payment. If we take this to court, the law is on your side. Hope flickered in Musa's chest for the first time in days. He gripped the edge of the desk, nodding quickly. So we can fight it? We can expose him? The lawyer hesitated, cleared his throat, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. Tell me something, Musa. Who is this landlord of yours? Musa blinked. Al-Haji Suleiman. He lives in the same compound. The lawyer's face changed, the pen slipped slightly in his hand. He adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing. Suleiman of Olawara Street? Yes. You know him? The silence that followed was heavier than words. Barrister Okoro leaned back slowly, his shoulders sagging. My friend, let me give you advice. Leave this matter. Forget it. Musa frowned, disbelief flooding him. But, you just said the case is strong. Why should I leave it? The lawyer's gaze shifted nervously toward the door, then back to Musa. He spoke in a whisper now. That man, he is not small. He has people in the council. He has police under his table. Even judges owe him favors. If I take this case, it will not be your problem alone. They will come for me too. Musa's lips parted, his voice trembling. So what do I do? The lawyer gathered the files on his desk, his movements suddenly brisk, final. Sometimes in this country, the law is not worth the paper it's written on. My advice? Find another room, rebuild your life, and pray God punishes him in his own time. With that, Barrister Okoro stood, already guiding Musa toward the door. His face carried forced politeness, but his eyes were full of fear. He patted Musa's shoulder once, softly, then closed the door firmly behind him. Musa stood outside in the noisy street, the city pressing around him, feeling smaller than he had ever felt before. Even the law had turned its face away. The days that followed turned Musa into a ghost. His mattress, swollen with rainwater, had to be abandoned. What little he could salvage he carried in 2 Ghana must-go bags that he dragged through the streets. For a time, he squatted in a mechanic's workshop where an old friend worked, sleeping on a bench at night while mosquitoes feasted on his skin. Every evening, Musa found himself drawn back toward the compound, standing at a distance, watching. The yard that had once echoed with his laughter now seemed like a theater where life continued without him. The children still played football in the mud. Women still washed clothes in their basins. But now and then, Musa caught their stolen glances, pity mixed with fear, as if his downfall had marked him as a warning. Al-Haji, of course, was more visible than ever. 2 evenings after Musa's eviction, he hosted a gathering in the compound. A cow's head was roasted, cola nuts were passed around, and bottles of soft drinks clinked beneath the glow of bare bulbs strung across the yard. He stood in his flowing kaftan, a hand resting lightly on his prayer beads, laughing with the men, reminding them of how he tried his best to save poor Musa from disgrace. Ah, but you all saw it, he said, his voice rising so everyone could hear. I begged the boy to do the right thing, but some people do not value peace. I hate to see a young man suffer, but rules are rules. May Allah guide us, the tenants murmured in agreement, nodding in rhythm, though in their eyes flickered quiet unease. Samira, perched nearby in a fitted blouse and bright headscarf, smirked at their obedience, sipping her malt drink as if savoring a private victory. From the shadows of the street, Musa clenched his fists. Every word cut deeper than the eviction itself. He wanted to shout, to storm into the yard and expose the truth, but what voice did he have now? His receipt was gone, the lawyer had turned away, and the very people who had once greeted him warmly now avoided his gaze. Lagos carried on, as Lagos always did, restless, indifferent. But inside Musa's chest, anger smoldered, refusing to die. Months passed, and Musa became another forgotten story in Lagos, another young man swallowed by the city's belly. The tenants no longer mentioned his name. To speak of him was to invite trouble. His room was quickly repainted and rented out to a new tenant, a civil servant who paid double what Musa once did. Al-Haji's compound thrived. He strutted through the yard each morning in fresh kaftans, greeting tenants with blessings, pretending to be the guardian of their peace. On Fridays, he sat in the front row at the mosque, pressing crisp notes into the imam's hand, his piety glowing in public view. Samira still moved about like a queen, her sharp tongue carving silence wherever she walked. But the truth, hidden beneath the varnish, was darker than the compound walls. The rent Musa had paid had gone straight into Al-Haji's gambling debts, swallowed in one night at a smoky private club on the island. The missing receipt had been destroyed deliberately, Samira herself tearing it up with a satisfied smile after her father had waved the money away. When Musa sought help, his case had been quietly mentioned at the local council office. One official shook his head, muttering, "That's Suleiman's house. Leave it," for Al-Haji was no ordinary landlord. He was the brother-in-law of a sitting commissioner, the business partner of a police DPO, and the financier of a local party ward chairman. To touch him was to touch a nest of hornets. Even the lawyer Musa had approached, Barrister Okoro, had received a phone call the same night, an unnamed voice reminding him of his pending license renewal, warning that some cases are better left untouched. So Musa's story never entered any court record. It became smoke, seen, smelled, but untouchable. And yet, the compound carried on. Tenants laughed, children played, and the smell of fried plantain drifted through the air at dusk. The silence was the rent they paid, the unspoken agreement to keep breathing. From the street outside, a passerby might think Al-Haji's compound was peaceful, even blessed. They would not see the young man who once lived there, kneeling in the rain with his belongings, begging for dignity. They would not hear the quiet fear that choked every tenant's throat. But you see it, the truth sat there all along, buried beneath power and prayer beads, waiting for the day it would no longer be hidden.